Welcome back. As promised, we're going to talk about Nashville. Now, Nashville's off to an 0-5 start, and there are some people who did not believe the hype around Nashville. I did, sure. They were a team that finished 11th overall last season, and then they added Marchessault, Stamkos, Shea. No reason to think this team shouldn't at least be as good, if not better, than last season. I mean, the conversation of whether or not they're Stanley Cup contenders still being out there and all, at this point, the answer has been a resounding no. They are not a Stanley Cup contender at this point, but that's the magic of it being October. There's a lot of time before March and April when we're going to find out who the real true contenders are going into a playoffs, which reveals everything. But Nashville has to get to those playoffs, and that is it's never too early to ask that question. And of course, people will point to the Oilers and their comeback, and then they'll look back 5 years to St. Louis. But there's a reason we point those out because it's not common. It's not common that a team that starts this badly then rallies and makes the playoffs. So it started October 10th. It was a home game against Dallas. They lose that game 4-3. It's scoreless after the first, and Dallas had a very good second period. They're leading 4-1 after two. Nashville did have a furious attempt at a comeback. Very nearly did tie it. Would have at least had a point. Maybe they would have won in overtime. And we wouldn't be having this conversation. Wedgwood saved 16 out of 20. I didn't think it was a great game for Wedgwood that night. And again, and maybe if Saros is in net, maybe they win this. Maybe we're not here talking about it. October 12th, so a road game, and the only road game they've played to this point, by my count, they lose 3-0 against the Detroit Red Wings. So Detroit has shown up on this board twice, meaning they're done with Detroit, and they'll be happy to be done with Detroit. That game was scoreless after the first. It was 1-0 Detroit after the second. Saros saves 19 out of 21 in defeat, so there's an empty netter in there, which makes it look a little more lopsided than it was. But yeah, they could not manage a goal against the Detroit Red Wings. October 15th, they're back home. They lose 7-3. So it's a 3-2 Seattle lead after the first. It's tied at 3 after the second. Saros 28 saves on 34 shots. So for UC Saros, not his best statistical night. His stats have been off a little bit. And it is interesting because last year in the first half of the season, he had his struggles. He picked it up in the second half. It definitely looks like there's a pattern that might be repeating itself here. And the issue is they're not winning games. They're not finding ways to score their way past some of the goaltending numbers not being where you want them to be. October 17th, still at home. They lose 4-2 against the Oilers. It was 1-1 after the first. 3-2 for the Oilers after the second. Saros saves 32 out of 35 in the defeat. So you've got that's 3 empty net goals against them to that point. We got a couple more in the next game. Empty netters are making things look a little bit uglier than they are when we get to goal differential, and we will get there. But still, they need to be ahead in these games. They don't have to worry about the empty netters. October 19th, the most recent game at the time I'm recording this, at home, they lose 5-2 against Detroit. It was 1-1 after the first, 2-1 Detroit after the second. So what's interesting is, outside of the game against Dallas, every game's been close after 2 periods. But they've been trailing 4 out of their 5 games played after the second period. They have not shown an ability to come back and win. They showed an ability to come back and get close against Dallas. They were not able to come back and win that game. So that's where they're at right now. Now, tonight, they're at home against Boston. And as you can see, being at home has not helped them to this point. They're 0-4 at home, so you have to hope they're better away from home. And they're away on Friday against Chicago. That's winnable. Then they're at home on Saturday against Columbus. So, just saying, hey, what about this? They could beat Boston tonight. Absolutely, that's a possibility. I think while Boston's a good team, they're not a fantastic team. They are a team that they have their weaknesses here and there, and Nashville could defeat them. And then you have Chicago and Columbus. So there's the possibility that 3 games from now they're 3-5, and we're talking about them digging their way out of this. Because then they go away on the Monday to play against Tampa, and then on Halloween night, which is Thursday, they're back home and they're playing the Oilers again. So of their next 5 games, Tampa Bay and Boston are the only ones that are above the playoff line. And Edmonton, of course, is one that we know is very likely going to end up above the playoff line by the end of the year. They just like to start slow. It's building tension. It's what they do. But yeah, Tampa Bay's not an easy out, and yeah, that leaves you with Chicago and Columbus, games that Nashville has to win. They have to win, I think, both of those back to back, and really start building some momentum, and show what they can do, and build on the emotion that they have without taking too many penalties, of course, and find some way to get some guys out of a funk. So let's look at the scoring stats. Forsberg leads the team in scoring with 2 goals, 3 assists for 5 points. Point per game is good. They're not getting a lot past that. Marchessault with a goal and 3 assists. O'Reilly with a goal and 3 assists. And Roman Josi, just the 3 helpers so far. And then you get into the kind of slow starts here with Stamkos, just the 1 goal. He did have that in the last game against Detroit. Maybe he's ready to break out. Maybe playing against Boston, he'll realize, oh, I know what to do against Boston, and maybe he'll go out and get a hat trick tonight. He's capable. He's 34. He's not 40, so he's absolutely capable of breaking out of this rut. Brady Shea, just the 1 goal thus far, too. Nyquist is the one that, to me, is alarming because I had wondered when they acquired these players what's going to happen with Gustav Nyquist. Nyquist had, I think, arguably his best season as an NHLer last year. Now, you add guys, it's going to affect where Nyquist's playing and who he's playing with, and maybe affect ice time as well, and he just has the 1 assist so far. So that was the one concern I had with them bringing in these players, was that it might negatively impact other players on the roster. But I felt like the risk was worth it, since it's Marchessault, it's Stamkos, pretty good players, and Shea on the blue line. And then Colton Sissons, no points for him, and an ugly -8. Again, plus minus is a very flawed number, but it's interesting to look at, especially when you're looking at just through 5 games. It's a small sample size. It's one of those weird stats. I feel like over a 2 or 3 game span, you get an idea for, who might be struggling or whose line is struggling. Over a full season, I don't think it tells you as much. So that's why I'm more likely to talk about plus minus in a situation like this. I never talk about it in career videos. I don't pay much attention to it when I talk about players at the end of the season and the numbers they put up, because plus minus is it's an interesting stat. I find it more interesting over a smaller number of games. Saros has an .875 save percentage. It goes without saying that needs to be better for this team to improve. Wedgwood at .800. So there's probably a lot of blame to go around. And of course, you always have to focus on the coach a little bit when a team's off to a rough start like this. And there have been times in the NHL where a coach hasn't been around that long and he's gone. That does happen at times, so that is something to keep an eye on. I didn't throw that on the board because I don't think we're there. I don't think Barry Trotz, especially with Barry Trotz having been a coach himself and a coach who was in Nashville for a very long time, I don't think he's going to have a quick trigger finger when it comes to replacing the coach. I'd be very surprised if that took place. So they're 8 points out of the playoffs currently. 5 games into the season and already 8 points out. St. Louis in that number 2 wildcard spot. And the number 1 wildcard is Minnesota. They also have 8 points. They've played 1 less game than St. Louis. And you're already in a situation where if Nashville doesn't win tonight, we could be talking tomorrow about a team that's already double-digit points out of the playoffs. Which you can make that up. You absolutely can. You can make that up. But it's tough. And you've got to go on a winning streak, and you got to do it soon. You can't afford to lose 3 of these next 5 games or 4 of these next 5 games, because you are really putting yourself in a rough spot. What the Oilers did this past season was they switched coaches, which of course will mean that we might see something change in Nashville if through 10 games things aren't better. But they got it to click, and Edmonton was a team that we knew was going to be a contender, and eventually they got back to that. Nashville's a team that acquired these players looking to become a contender, and then you get into the questions of whether or not you've disrupted the chemistry, all that other fun stuff. And so I think it's a little bit more of a challenge for Nashville. If Nashville ends up 2-9-1, which I think was the record for Edmonton when they made the change from Jay Woodcroft to Chris Knobloch, I think that it's a more dire situation for Nashville this year than it was for Edmonton last year. So their goal differential is a -13. That is the worst in the league, other than San Jose, who have a -14. San Jose has played 1 extra game, though, so there's that to consider. And I mentioned before, there's a lot of empty netters, but you get a lot of empty netters against you because you're losing the games. So you can factor that into the goal differential, but it's an ugly number either way. Their power play tied for 17th in the league so far at 18.8%. That needs to be better. Their penalty kills honestly been good, 86.7%. That's 7th in the NHL. So defensively, it's not as bad as it might look here if you look at the penalty kill. Penalty kill is usually a good reflection of your defensive scheme, your special teams coach, and your goaltender. And so that might give you some hope that they're going to dig their way out. But the question that I have for people watching this is simple. Will Nashville dig their way out of this mess, say by, American Thanksgiving or maybe by Christmas? Or is this team just, they were overrated? They went out and they bought when they shouldn't have this summer and they've got themselves into trouble? Because in the event that Stamkos has this kind of season, if he can't score this year, if he ends up with like, say, 40 points, that cap hit for Stamkos all of a sudden goes from that's not bad to wow, that's awful. And I'm sure that somebody somewhere in Tampa brass is looking at Stamkos and going, we might have made the right call picking up Gensel and moving on from Stamkos. But yeah, so we'll see. Let me know your thoughts. How many of the next 5 games do you think Nashville's going to win? One other thing that I think is troubling is I can make the argument for how they could have come back and beaten Dallas and won that game. I'm looking at the other 4 games. I don't know that they had a deserve to win on that of any sort. They've just been outplayed for the most part. So that's an issue. That's definitely an issue. And again, that's where somebody might make the argument that, hey, it's coaching. Might need to change something behind the bench. You're not going to be able to trade guys on really expensive contracts that you just signed. So sometimes the coach has to be the scapegoat. Again, with Barry Trotz, I think he'll have more patience, but we'll find out, won't we? Let me know your thoughts, though. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.